Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are on day 4 of Earth Deserves More Than a Day event series. If you missed it, we had the Front and Center programs team talking about a little bit about what Front and Center does. A little bit of a recap for this week. Last night was amazing. We had youth from Feast, Anak Bayan, and Kitsap Black Student Union here sharing some of their thoughts on what's going on in the worlds around them. Had a lot to do with mental health. So I was so grateful for them taking time during the week to share their thoughts. We also had Johnny Buck from Na'ilahi and Dan Namkin from Young Warrior Society. All of those things, if you missed it, you can catch on our website, frontandcenter.org, or you can go to Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio is co-hosting this whole week of Earth Deserves More Than a Day. We are at the historic Columbia City Theater all week. Come down, hang out. On Friday night, tomorrow, we will be having an EJ Mixer for us to all gather in community and to talk about the week of Earth Deserves More Than a Day, to talk about our climate, to talk about what we can do as a community to do better. So I have this wonderful friend of mine here, Minda Martin. We are about to show her film. I'm going to hand it over to Minda to introduce, but thank you for tuning in. And Minda, go ahead. Stay tuned afterwards because Minda and I will be chatting just for a little bit about the film and her work here in Seattle. So here you go.
Hi, thank you, Rebecca. It's an honor to be here and to be affiliated with Front and Centered. I love this organization. I love everything that you guys do. And I love this movie theater. So thank you, Columbia City Theater. Thank you for having us here. I believe this is like the best screening space for this film ever. I am so excited to have this film screened in this theater. What an honor. Thank you so much. Ramps to Nowhere is the title of the film. It's about a freeway fight that took place here in Seattle in the late 60s to the early 70s, in which they stopped a planned network of freeways throughout Seattle. Seattle was designed to be basically like Houston. If anybody's ever been to Houston, you have freeways everywhere. It was all supposed to be like Los Angeles, but Seattle is a very narrow-waisted city, so you can imagine there was going to be a freeway within every mile of this city. And that was realized. There were maps for that. And a lot of those freeways had already been started in construction. But the citizens in the city, the people, rose up, they organized, and they fought. They stopped a planned network of freeways. And it's a story that the city tried to hide, tried to shut down, but the people remembered it. And it just tells you that people's stories in their mind, no matter what the city or the governments or corporations try to hide, you remember, you tell it. And this is one of those stories. Thank you.
I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, on the west side of the freeway. The I-10 served as a marker between the east and the west side. People who lived on the west side were mostly people of color and poor. When I was 19, I got a job doing construction on this freeway, where I learned from one of the workers how the I-10 broke up several historical and predominantly Mexican neighborhoods. When I left Tucson, the first city I moved to was Los Angeles. There's an east and west side marked by race and class in Los Angeles, depending on which side of the freeway you're living next to. I lived in Echo Park, sandwiched between the 101, the I-5, the 110, and the 2. It seemed like every neighborhood in Los Angeles had a freeway going through it, except for Beverly Hills. During the end of my stay, the car became my home. The next city I moved to was San Diego. The only place I could afford to live was next to the I-5. I kept the windows and the doors shut all the time due to the black dust and the noise that would come in from the freeway. Occasionally, I would be startled by the sound of metal crunching. I continued to work or live next to freeways. Recently, I moved to Seattle. My job is next to the 405 and the 522 interchange. During a bike ride, I noticed stumps of freeway ramps buried in ivy, and at my bus stop, I saw photos of the road I take to get to and from work. I followed this road for several miles south to an abandoned freeway interchange near the middle of the city called Ramps to Nowhere. I was fascinated by these ruins. I wanted to know what happened, what was before, and how it came to last this long. So I started asking questions. People in the area were telling me, the ramps are going down, you better photograph them now, because they'll be gone by next year. They're coming down to reconstruct and expand the 520 Lake Washington Bridge. During one of my visits to Ramps to Nowhere, I came across a group of architects and public artists who had reclaimed one of the ramps with mirrors and called the work Gate to Nowhere. They were working with a group called ARCH, which stands for Activists, Remembered, Celebrated, and Honored. ARCH was trying to preserve one of the ramps from Ramps to Nowhere and to tell the history of a citywide freeway revolt that took place in the late 60s and early 70s. This is that story.
And there's this big map on the wall, and it was the Seattle Transportation Plan. And I started looking at it, and I thought, this has got to be a joke. It can't be serious. It had this dense network of freeways and bridges, at least 15 freeways within Seattle. We're talking here about projects that in the aggregate would displace about 10% of the property owners of the whole city.
This is what Seattle looked like in the 1950s before the freeways were built. And this is the Seattle freeway network today. But this is what Seattle would have looked like had the highwaymen been able to realize their plans. In this story, we are going to look at 4 freeways built and unbuilt: the I-5, the I-90, the Bay Freeway, and the R.H. Thompson Expressway. In 1956, Congress passed the largest public works project in history known as the Federal Highway Act. The freeways would connect and go through cities as part of the Interstate Highway and Defense System. The federal government provided 90% of the funding for highway construction to be spent by 1971. This gave unprecedented power to federal and state highway departments to transform American cities in the 1960s. Often, they chose neighborhoods where the land was cheapest or residents who were least likely to fight back.
I started with really a highway-dominated era in Washington state. The interstate system had just been passed in the National Congress, and we were just starting the planning and the analysis of what should go on in Washington State on the interstate system.
Seattle is known for remaking itself multiple times, from moving mountains to digging up large holes, resettling tide flats, drying up and rerouting rivers, creating new land out of other parts of the city, so the freeways were just one more of the many makeovers of this city.
It was a new idea to build a major freeway system inside the city, and it started with I-5.
When they went through and took homes for I-5, they took away 6,000 houses.
When the I-5 freeway was built, it went right through downtown, and it cut the city in half.
People in Seattle in general saw the effects of I-5. It was a tangible example of what freeways do to cities.
Public hearings were held on the I-5. Those who had property had the option to sell to the state or move their home to another part of the city. But those who didn't own property were given a short period of time to relocate with little assistance from the state. Some residents organized resistance to the I-5, but they were unsuccessful in stopping the freeway. This is what happened to one of those neighborhoods.
When the immigrants came here from China, Japan, Philippines, they were segregated into this neighborhood. Because of the covenants that covered most of Seattle neighborhoods, people of color could not purchase homes, or sellers who owned these homes could not sell to their people of color. Most of the immigrants were segregated, living in this community from China, Japan, the Philippines. That first wave, you had 3 different languages, 3 different customs, 3 different social networks. During the 60s, the leaders of Seattle are planning this freeway. It comes to the International District, and there were a lot of single-family housing and apartments, and so it displaced a lot of homes. And we were sort of devastated by that, and all the construction, the noise, and so the poor residents, especially the elderly, limited English and non-speaking Asian elderly, were very concerned about being displaced. And then I-90 was being planned on the south side of the district in the late 60s. So the residents here, they're being driven crazy by all this planning and all this development that impacts their community, the Chinatown, Manila town, Japantown of this district.
Freeways have transformed the way we see cities in America. They hide people's histories and access. Who lived here before the freeway, and who lives around the freeway, who uses the freeway. While I-5 was splitting up neighborhoods, other freeways were being planned, packaged, and sold as progress.
Now another progress report from Mayor Clinton.
I thought perhaps you'd be interested in seeing a few of our most recent traffic improvements. The Broad and Mercer Street underpass, the Alaskan Way Viaduct extension, the Empire Way extension. Now, through a 6-year capital improvement program, plans and priorities have been set.
It was 1960, and cities throughout America were getting a facelift to accommodate the automobile. And Seattle was leading that charge as voters approved a bond to build 2 freeways through their city, the R.H. Thompson Expressway and the Bay Freeway. The road I'd take to work was supposed to be the other north-south I-5, or the R.H. Thompson Expressway, that would have split and erased neighborhoods along the 14-mile path from Duwamish to the Rainier Valley, Central District, Montlake, Ravenna, Lake City, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, and Bothell. The R.H. Thompson Expressway doesn't exist on a map, but a large remnant of it, known as the Ramps to Nowhere, was left in the Montlake neighborhood. A 12-lane section stopped from connecting to a planned highway network more than 50 years ago. While filming the area around Ramps to Nowhere, I noticed that it sits next to the Lake Washington Ship Canal that was celebrating its centennial. R.H. Thompson, Seattle's most famous engineer for giving the city its multiple facelifts, helped in the funding and location of the canal. The city lowered the lake by 9 feet, which dried up the wetlands along the shores and rerouted and erased rivers that the indigenous people relied on for food, cultural practices, and to get to and from their homes. This followed a pattern of banning, restricting, and then appropriating the history and culture of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Coast Salish tribes. After the cut, this land became a garbage dump. Then, it became the west end of the second Lake Washington Freeway Bridge. Then, it became the construction site of the R.H. Thompson Arboretum Interchange. After the freeway revolt, it became a community space. And for now, it's a construction site for the expanded 520 bridge.
These petitioners intend to defend their homes to the legal limit against the planned seizure by the city of Seattle as now contemplated, a seizure which is in their judgment unjustified by the facts and is put forth solely to appease certain pressure groups in the city of Seattle who are not affected by the condemnation.
I lived there for 36 years. It would be quite a hardship for me at my age, 66, to start looking around for another house to live in. However, I did look around, and when I looked at about 30 or 40 houses, I find that such a house would cost, in this day and age, about $16,000. Whereas condemnation price that I could possibly get, $12,000. So I'd have to take out a mortgage for the balance.
You are our voice. Without you, we lose all that we stand for in this country. What we are asking more than anything else is that in view of the terrific, rapid change that is going on in planning, that you will not be impulsive in making a decision that will bring about irreparable loss.
So this beautiful piece of parkland was actually, when I was growing up, it was a big open pit, literally, called the Montlake Pit. And it's a place where several dozen homes once stood that were demolished for the R.H. Thompson Expressway. In a sense, this was the epicenter of the initial citizen revolt.
Similar threats were arising in neighborhoods to the south of Montlake, where the R.H. Thompson was going to join the I-90.
When we got here in the 1950s, there had already been a well-established central district or black community that had rich history, including jazz and the arts. It was a regular stop for greats like Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, John Coltrane.
While freeways were being planned and partially constructed in the city during the 50s and 60s, various groups joined the nationwide civil rights movement to change the laws that had prevented people of color from receiving the same resources and access as whites. Like the International District, the Central District was another neighborhood shaped by discriminatory housing practices.
What was known as the white flight had been occurring, and whites were moving out of the central city and blacks were moving into the central area because the housing was inexpensive. And 2 blocks to the east of us was where the Red Line existed. That was an area that blacks and other minorities were restricted from moving into. So we were hurdled almost into the central district, which became our home and became the foundation of and the center of black culture in Seattle.
Now another progress report from Mayor Clinton.
With the spirited assistance of volunteer citizens groups, your city is engaged in dramatically revitalizing several of our older neighborhoods through Seattle's Urban Renewal Program.
The Yeslo Atlantic Urban Renewal Project was based in the Central District. It was also at the intersection of the R.H. Thompson and the I-90.
As often occurs in cities across our nation, the intersection of freeways was often in low-income, inner-city ghetto communities, like the central area was in the 60s.
What if I had a little secret? Something I kept concealed. Oh, baby, just how would you take it? Would it be that big a deal? Most times my cards are on the table.
During 1963, the State Highway Department held the first public hearing on their route selections. These route hearings were held on Mercer Island, and very few Seattle people attended.
It was held in an apartment complex in North Mercer Island that was run by real estate interests had been accused of racial discrimination in housing opportunities. I don't know what the resolution of that was, but I remember that that was part of the argument that, you have this hearing and you have it 6 years ago, you don't tell any of the folks in the central area about it, and then you have it at this racist white apartment complex, and there are no black folks there at all. And later on, you're going to build this freeway right through to the heart of the black community. So why do you hold it in middle, upper class Mercer Island and not in Seattle, where there's going to be the most people affected by this?
The Highway Department was not required to illustrate what the bridge would look like, and they only discussed where the roads might be located. It wasn't until late 1966, when plans and sketches were first shown to the public, that the magnitude of their proposals became apparent.
I remember clearly it was Thanksgiving weekend because I thought, oh yeah, they did it during the weekend when nobody's reading the paper. But they had an article and they had this photo of the proposed third bridge. Lake Washington is here, and this would be the R.H. Thompson Expressway. And I was horrified. I thought, this is going to destroy our entire community. We're not that different. We're people also. We live here, and we want a community. You want your community, we want our community. Don't destroy our community to make it a little more convenient for you to get home 15 minutes earlier. The proposed bridge, the existing tunnel, Thompson Express.
Sugar, don't you worry. Sugar, it has happened before. Sugar, don't you worry. Sugar, what's one more?
The Bay Freeway was part of a ring road of freeways that was going to connect the Seattle center with the I-5. It was strongly supported by downtown business interests. Like the viaduct which blocked the downtown area from its waterfront, the Bay Freeway was going to wall off the Cascade neighborhood from South Lake Union.
We're greatly concerned about another elevated structure cutting off another body of water. We have central area almost encircled by elevated structures now, and it's only to the north that we're free.
I was a student at the university, but also an organizer in the Cascade neighborhood. And we were just trying to save the neighborhood, mainly for the people who were living there. Very low income, a lot of seniors, a lot of young people looking for affordable housing. And so we took up the fight against the freeway, but also to save and preserve a bunch of affordable housing in the Cascade neighborhood.
After the freeway revolt, the Cascade neighborhood continued to offer affordable housing for seniors and students until the major tech giants like Amazon moved in.
Well, this box has a variety of materials about the freeway fighting. Ooh, it's very musty smelling. Seattle Engineering Department, questions and answers about the Bay Freeway. And I was the treasurer of the Vote No Bay Freeway. The whole funding mechanism, the whole design had morphed from sort of like improvements along Mercer Street into something that was going to be an elevated road like the Alaska Way Viaduct.
In 1968, the anti-freeway movement was born in Seattle with the founding of two organizations: Citizens Against Freeways in the north end of the city, and Citizens Against the R.H. Thompson based in the Montlake area. At the same time, the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party was founded in the Central District.
Well, this is where it all started for me, certainly. This is the first house we ever bought, and one day somebody from the highway department called and asked me if I'd sell my house because they're going to punch a freeway through, and that was the first I'd heard about it.
I had moved all my life, being in a Navy family, and I went to almost a different school almost every year. We moved here, and I thought, what do? It's a permanent home. That was scary. But then the lucky thing about it was Don Gibbs knocking on my door. And he said, do you know what's going on around here? What's going to happen to your house? The freeway's going to come through here and wipe out this house and everything. And really, I had just moved in, 4 kids, and I'm going, really? And I found myself on the board in January.
Then I discovered that there were houses down the street and up the street that were unkempt and were owned by the highway department. The highway department was slowly, gradually buying houses and letting them run down deliberately as a way of diminishing any potential resistance to the freeway. And what to me was precious about the neighborhood is that it was economically integrated and also racially integrated. I had only heard about this organization called Citizens Against the R.H. Thompson. I was pretty vague about that. It seemed to be some wild-eyed people with crazy ideas about that they could stop a freeway. So I didn't have much sense of that. But then I went up, and after this great publicity came out in our neighborhood about these rotten apple houses, we called them, because they were designed to spoil the whole neighborhood. Then I met Maynard Arsove and the group that had formed around him. He was a sensible leader. Some of us were firebrands. Some of us were so excitable, had such wild schemes about what we could do.
It is proposed for Seattle to have the densest system of highways of any city in the entire world, a virtual 1-mile grid. Will the city we are making be livable for this and coming generations?
I think we know more about forces which destroy cities now. We have learned that cities are more fragile than anybody ever dreamed, and that when they fall apart, no one knows how to put them back together again.
I'm Dave Lefebvre, and I represent people who don't like freeways in the north end of the city of Seattle. We are familiar with the fact that the outcome of the study quite often can be predetermined by evaluating the funding source and looking at the bias of the people who are doing it and the people who are managing it.
You cannot talk about one part of this system without talking about the entire system. Will the study include the amount of land taken off the tax rolls due to the entire system? And how many people will be displaced by the entire system?
Our community has spent millions of dollars for experts to solve our transportation problems. The recommendations have all been based on the concept of individual transportation requiring freeways and bridges. The results have been to confuse, delay, and to sabotage comprehensive planning and construction of publicly owned transportation.
At first, everybody felt somewhat powerless. It was only after Maynard and Vic Steinbrook decided that they could do something with it, and they started talking to various people that we felt, well, wait a minute, we have a voice here, and maybe we can actually make it some kind of an effect on people if we speak up. That's what galvanized many of the community councils into action, raising their voice. And for once, I think democracy actually worked.
We organized community meetings all over town. We called it the Pony Show. There were 4 of us who would go out and each one of us speak on a different aspect of the destructiveness of the freeway.
While community activists were connecting with residents about the destructive effects of these freeways, They turned out for public hearings, staged rallies, passed out pamphlets, and intensified pressure on elected officials. When elected officials didn't listen to them, they turned out in elections and voted new ones in. They also took their battles to the courts with lawsuits against the Bay Freeway and the I-90. In 1970, 7 Central District residents, represented by legal services, filed suit in the U.S. District Court to stop I-90.
The way we found the plaintiffs in the I-90 case was that I was hooked up with a African-American minister. We walked the neighborhood along the path of the proposed freeway, and we met with probably 30 people in their homes, sat down with them, talked with them, and we learned a good bit about what was going on in the community. One thing we learned was that a lot of the housing in that neighborhood had already been acquired by the highway department.
People felt it was unfair that the burden and the primary sacrifice for the creation of mobility for middle-class whites was the loss of homes and neighborhoods of working-class or low-income blacks. And we did not think it's fair that urban renewal essentially in this country was beginning to mean Negro removal.
The problem is that Interstate 90 isn't just a little local road project. It's a major link in this nation's 41,000-mile system of interstate and defense highways. Like it or not, it is. And I-90 begins in Boston, and it crosses the entire northern tier of states for 3,200 miles towards Seattle. Now, it's supposed to end in Seattle, but it never quite arrived. It ends at a little place called Eastgate, some 7 or 8 miles outside the city, and at that point, during peak hours, the vast nationwide superhighway that travels 32,000 miles to get here settles down to 1 lane to bring traffic into Seattle.
There was a play on the phrase "off the pig," which meant kill the police. There was sort of a tongue-in-cheek bumper sticker that was "off the bridge." That was on a lot of bumpers, including mine, in the Seattle Central area in those days.
Off the bridge, no more pigs in our community. Off the bridge.
We had organized the first chapter of the Black Panther Party outside the state of California.
We had organized some of the original, what we would call rainbow coalitions. The term rainbow coalition was coined by Fred Hampton, who was murdered in Chicago, because he spoke on the need for not only black power, but for white power, brown power, red power, yellow power, and all power to the people, which was our mantra, which meant that we all needed to come together and find power bases that would allow us to control the institutions within our communities so that they better served who we were. The 10-point program and platform of the Black Panther Party was about controlling the institutions within our community.
To Mayor Wes Ullman and the greater Seattle community, the black community is putting you on notice. We, the black people of Seattle, are initiating procedures to bring into reality a system of community control of the police. We are in the process of establishing a community alert patrol to deal with the foul and racist actions of pigs sent into our community by the white power structure downtown.
It was not activism. We were revolutionaries, and we were fighting for our existence and our survival. And survival programs that we organized were so that the communities could survive. When we looked into the black community in Seattle, we saw that second highest infant mortality rate in the state was in the CD. That was because young black women did not have adequate health care. So that is what prompted us to form our first free medical clinic. The first free medical clinic that we had was organized around what we called a well baby clinic.
So many Black Panthers got involved in going door to door with us around a freeway issue too. And our hope was that we could stop it early on and then later modify it.
We doorbelled from 145th to 85th, and it was several blocks wide, every house. When we would doorbell, we would hear over and over again, forget about it, you can't stop progress, or you can't fight City Hall.
Those two things we heard.
We'd over and over and again, and then we started saying to ourselves, that's BS. You can stop progress, and what in the hell is progress
Whatever
anyway?
we determine progress is.
What is it? And City Hall, that's us.
We were not just tin pan politics. We gained an ideology. We had a vision of what a city should be and how important neighborhoods were.
And what we saw in our ideology was that the suburbs' value would go up when a freeway connected the suburb to the city, and the values in the city would go down. We also learned from the larger freeway revolt that the highway department would pit one neighborhood against another neighborhood to see where the highway was going to go, and no neighborhood wanted the highway. So the neighborhoods would fight each other. We learned not to pit neighborhood against neighborhood, but to join neighborhoods and work together. Everybody pulled together to defeat the highway.
We understood that ideas have to couple with numbers, that democracy means numbers. Democracy depends on education. So our outreach to the communities with these pony shows that we did was the educational aspect. And then numbers by leafleting and publicity and enlisting the press, all of that amplifies it. And when you go down to City Hall and you can talk about the numbers of people who are your supporters, they listen.
There are two kinds of lobbyists. You have those representing organizations, and in many cases they are paid lobbyists, and that's their job. And then there are citizen lobbyists who, when they get active on an issue and can turn out citizens, they carry the day.
We had a big Save the Arboretum rally planned. 3,000 people at least came. And all the planning for that took place in this living room. And in this living room up here, we had one of the strangest coalitions you can imagine. We had the Bellevue Garden Clubs and the Black Panthers all meeting in the same room planning.
We had an edge to our organizing and the things that we stood for and the things that we were demanding. We had grown up, most of us, observing the civil rights movement and watching the beatings of demonstrators, the hosing, police dogs. The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church occurred when I was 13 years old. The assassinations of Medgar Evers, then Malcolm X, and eventually Martin Luther King, and as well as both Kennedys. The rise of J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO. And so I, along with others in my age group, we weren't about to lay down and we weren't about to ask for, we were about taking charge.
The thing that should be made clear right quick is that the freeway is a big trick by Tricky Dick, the big man, to divide the black community. It happened in Chicago. They built a freeway called the John F. Kennedy Freeway right down State Street, split up the black community. They're trying to do this in all the major cities across the nation to divide black people. When they subpoena the people and ask the people, can we build a freeway in your community, tell them to stick their subpoena up their ass, period.
While lawsuits by community activists were pending, the Highway Department continued to use similar tactics in other neighborhoods.
Lots of self-control, and I'll never want you to know.
Like the Montlake area, Judkins Park was at the crossroads of two freeways. But before it became a park, it was a ravine known as the Garlic Gulch because of the Italian immigrant community that lived around it. And then the city turned the area into a dump in the name of progress. The smell of garbage bothered residents, so they added dirt on top of the fill. And after years of regrading, it became a park.
The Judkins community, southernmost sector of this historic Central Area community. And in the late 1960s, it was about 85% African American. And it was the primary community that was supposed to be taken completely out if the R.H. Thompson had gone all the way through and I-90 had gone all the way through. And the only reason there was a compromise to build a lid over that whole area and still allow housing is because of the door-to-door work and all the little ghetto houses in the Judkins community. And they call it rejected because in the 60s, very little attention was ever given to it because most of the people were working class or very poor that lived there. So we decided to go door to door and mobilize people there against the freeways because they were the most directly impacted.
You know, I wasn't involved the way you were and the way my mom was, obviously, but my memory serves me that, you know, all of those beautiful homes that used to sit on the other side of 23rd were purchased by the Department of Transportation.
Yes, it was, federal money.
And there was a plan for more purchases to happen to connect these ramps to the planned R.H. Thompson Expressway.
That's the planning blight. We had mansions up here. These are big, huge, I mean, we're talking large mansions. And that was the other part. They were going to make 23rd, it would have wiped out the entire African-American business district.
Now, one of the greatest problems that the freeway brings is the removal of residential property, particularly, in this case, of lower-income families. Now, this freeway acts as a major restructuring force within the existing community. It is large. It will intrude upon an existing single-family residential area.
Because this is a new problem in American life, in American cities, of how to bring freeways into the city in a sensitive manner. Typical problem, as we've seen it in the past, is that the old rules that applied to suburban freeways when brought into the city simply don't work. But first we've had to research how to make concrete more pleasant to the normal suburban community. And we're suggesting texture and color that will be a new kind of freeway palette.
I met the people and the citizens against R.H. Thompson. They were kind of the spear carriers of the anti-freeway movement. And among the things that impressed me was that they seemed to know more about transportation than people that I'd talked to in the transportation department.
Over half of all the highway trust funds generated in states throughout the country are generated on city streets. Maybe these highways are a lucrative source of revenue for the state highway department.
The narrow waist of Seattle makes land here so scarce that we cannot permit additional traffic corridors simply to provide for commuters.
We have here today, however, something that disturbs me greatly. The request for the $3.2 million came from engineers. Where are the people in the city who are responsible for our health, safety, welfare? Now, I wanted to point out to you that you really have the entire rights to determine what transportation goes through Seattle. This is absolutely up to the City Council. Citizens have the right to determine what is best for their city.
What do you propose we do today, ma'am?
I propose that you spend any amount of
Excuse me just a minute, ma'am, please.
And a young fellow with a lot of energy, who I'd never heard of before, named Larry Gossett, organized so that when they had a hearing, I think the hearing was at the Seattle Center, they had about 1,000 people. I think they had to continue the hearing for like 5 evenings.
What we're confronted with now is a representative of the people, our city council, being intimidated by the highway department or blackmailed or whatever you want to call it. You are bringing a major arterial highway into an overcrowded city.
We must stop destroying our city, our lake, and our lives by futile catering to the private automobile. Instead, we must really plan for people and for now, not 1985, or is it 1984? Expect a mess and expect riots if this deal proceeds.
This microphone is closed.
My name is Kathy Howard, and I'm from the Black Panther Party and from the black community. I think that it's very important, first of all, for a black woman to get up and speak. I think it's very important for women to get up and speak, and I think it's very important for people to get up and understand what's going on out here tonight. It's very important for people to understand the priorities that are involved concerning the highways or just a microcosm of the priorities that are pushed forth by this country and pertaining to the welfare of the people. Freeway is one issue that people should be getting organized around, but that's not the main thing. People are talking about cars going to Boston, people talking about cars going to New York. People in the black community cannot eat. When they have a pre-dawn raid about people in Los Angeles, people have got to understand what's going on. And when they come up to 173 20th Avenue and start raiding people in this city, people have really got to start reevaluating what's going on. Not just start reevaluating, start moving on it. And just one more thing, I just want to say, power of the people is greater than man technology. And our power of the people and seize the time.
Will you give your name, and if you represent an organization, state that organization?
I just represent black people from the black community known as the Central Area in Seattle.
Could you give us your name?
My name isn't important. You see me, so that's my name. I see the I-90 project, the R.H. Thompson, and all these other package deals that you've signed, sealed, and delivered as destructive measures perpetrated upon the black community. And I'd like to go down on record now that there are certain elements in the black community prepared and ready to deal with this situation by any means necessary. They can go over, around, under, but they are not coming through the Central Area.
Thank you very much.
The Young Socialist Alliance and the Socialist Workers' Party have been very effective in this country in building mass demonstrations in opposition to the war. We will use all of the organizational techniques that we have learned in that experience to stop this highway from going through.
At the time of this hearing, more than $55 billion had been spent by the federal government to pour over 200,000 miles of concrete. Public transportation was being dismantled and underfunded. The air, the sound, the smell, and the light of the cities in America had changed.
It's the nature of most Americans to prefer private transportation to public transportation. It would be the height of folly if we were to blind ourselves to this basic fact, whether we like it or not, or to try to reverse it by curtailing or stopping highway construction. This would force our people to leave Seattle, to live and work outside Seattle, and to create the very Los Angeles situation that some of you say here you don't want.
In the past, freeways have been built for the lowest possible cost per mile. The Washington State Highway Department readily admits this, and also says that this is not the case with I-90. The emphasis for I-90 is on design. Design for people.
A picture in last Sunday's Seattle Times shows a model depicting rather beautiful facilities that could be built on top of the lid that's being proposed for I-90. a daycare center, a community college, a rapid transit complex, and a building which is somewhat cavalierly labeled job training are all shown. The impression is being created that these facilities are a part of the Highway Department's proposal. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that none of these facilities can be funded from highway funds, and it is far from obvious that other funds will be available automatically for them. Even if there were funds available from other sources, it does not follow that we have to build a highway to build these facilities.
There is growing concern, as we become aware of it, for nitrogen oxides and hydrocarbons as they produce smog. These two types, the hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides, are far more dangerous than carbon monoxide. As a physician, I'm concerned about the health effects increasing number of cars will cause in our city. First of all, we know about the lead, which causes in high levels irreversible brain damage. Secondly, hydrocarbons associated with automobile emissions cause emphysema and cancer at levels which are currently associated with freeways. These have a lag period of about 20 years before these diseases become apparent. Thirdly, the noise levels are increasingly being associated with diseases such as high blood pressure and mental illness.
The freeway fighters didn't know about climate change, nor did they know about all the oil fields that would be discovered in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. But they knew that what was happening to their city and country needed to be stopped.
If there is anything that a freeway is, there is surely one thing that it is not. It is not free. Some millions of dollars are the smaller part of its cost. You admit that you are going to harm us, and all you can offer are these trivialities. You are going to shatter neighborhoods, and here you come again with the same old design. One more point. This is a public hearing. We are the public, and we have heard you. This is a public hearing. We are the public. Please, please hear us.
Motion dies. We've turned down the entire future of the Thompson and all of transportation in the city. I'm not belaboring it, I'm just saying this, that sometime, somewhere, someone, maybe not in the Montlake Terrace, maybe not out in Laurelhurst, but somewhere we've got to move people.
While community opposition helped turn the tide against the R.H. Thompson, it took a lawsuit to stop the Bay Freeway.
The Bay Freeway sort of flew onto the ballot after Margaret Tunks started this lawsuit. Unless you're going to go back and do what you originally told the citizens you were going to do, you have got to put this up to a vote of the people.
all pretty hepped up, and we had really done something as citizens, done something that hardly anybody in history had done, stopping big government projects. And our heads were full up that we could stop just about anything.
The government and planners have been working on it for 10 years, and they even had a vote in favor of it. To stop a project at that point is phenomenal.
The R.H. Thompson and the Bay Freeway were taken completely off the map, but struggles against the I-90 continued well into the decade.
The injunction that eventually came out from the district court was to stop all acquisition of housing in that neighborhood. The rate of acquisition certainly slowed, and the injunction had its effect.
While lawsuits stopped the highway department from purchasing homes in the corridor, community activists pressed for design changes to reduce the size of the freeway and accommodate future mass transit. 6 lanes in the original I-90 design were eliminated, saving much of the surrounding community. The widening of Interstate 90 and highway department tactics that devalued the land devastated the communities around this area.
Even though the project was halted, still the state took over their homes and they didn't get those homes back. So there's still lingering effects of that. In fact, a member of the Black Panther Party had a home right there that demolished, and now there's just a big empty lot that's overlooking the current, configuration of bridges over there. But that all attributed to the eventual dilapidation of that community.
The I-90 was eventually connected to I-5 in 1993.
We wanted to stop all freeways completely from that area. We were not successful at that, but at least the lead that you see there, the playfield that you see exists because of the struggle at that time.
There was a planned grid of highways for Seattle that would have made it one of the densest freeway networks in America, if not the world. I'm in the middle of a freeway. That didn't happen.
Only 17% of the Central District is black. So it's the reverse flight where up-and-coming, well-to-do whites will move into the area and drive up the home prices, which drives up property taxes, which forces people out of their homes.
In some ways, the irony is that the people who were promoting the highways because they wanted to see a bigger metropolis, in fact, would have probably contributed to a more failing metropolis. Whereas by not having those highways be built, they actually created space within the city to engage in more concentrated urban, commercial, even residential development. Any major freeway activity now in the state gets a very small portion of the total cost from the federal government. And if you're talking about big projects in metropolitan areas like Seattle, you're shoving more and more of the cost onto the local population. And for those that can afford it, fine. For those that can't, then they find themselves moving further and further away. And that's creating an effect where we're having, strangely enough now, the poorest people living on the perimeter and the people who have the best jobs, of course, living and working in the city.
For a short period of time, I lived in my car in Los Angeles and remembered the freeway as a kind of shelter because of the noise and the invisibility to others, and wondered how these concrete dragons were created and became so interwoven in the American identity. During the making of this film, I saw an unsheltered population increase under freeways in Seattle and throughout cities in America. At the same time, housing prices continued to soar. The very neighborhoods that Seattle's anti-freeway activists fought to preserve were now unaffordable to many. But there was a hopeful sign. After I attended a hearing to save one of the ramps from ramps to nowhere, I heard various groups fighting for an affordable housing measure, drawing on the same grassroots tactics used by freeway fighters 50 years ago. A revolt for affordable housing was underway. On one of my visits to Ramps to Nowhere, I stumbled upon this tree with its branches wrapped around the concrete pillars. I kept coming back to film its changes and hoped that the parks people would see what I and others saw, but they didn't see it as a tree worth saving. I was born at the height of this city's freeway revolt and grew up wrestling with social and economic inequality. Seeing the militarization of the police, the prison industrial complex that targets the poor and people of color, experiencing the loss of so many loved ones due to diseases caused by our altered environment, seeing the rivers and lakes be spoiled by toxic spills, deforestation, mining, loss of habitat and species. The same questions then are still being asked now. Who benefits and who loses?
Everybody in the house. Everybody in the house. Everybody in the house. Get on the floor and stop the mouse. Get on your feet, squeak, squeak. Everybody in the house, get on the floor and stomp the mouse. Get on your feet, squeak, squeak. I'm not the same woman that I used to be. No, no, no. Used to let my ways crucify me. Had a revelation that changed everything. I've got a secret to feeling so free. Yeah. Let go of your body and your mind.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not meeting Mrs. Jones in that cafe for a chat and nothing else, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Are you a small business owner in Seattle who was impacted by COVID-19? The Seattle Office of Economic Development is investing $8 million to connect small businesses to operating capital. The Small Business Capital Access Program will lower the cost of Washington State Small Business Flex Fund loans by paying down 25% of the loan principal. Eligible small businesses can borrow up to $150,000 with a 4% interest rate to cover expenses like payroll, rent, utilities, and supplies.
Hello, listener. What's important to you about what's going on in your community? Are you interested? Are you concerned? In any case, I invite you to tune into my show, Seattle Here and Now, on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Why? I will be covering a wide range of topics important to you and impacting the community. Each show will have a special guest or guests to share with you information on a variety of subjects that are happening here and now in Seattle. I promise I will work hard to make my show informative, interesting, and entertaining. Be sure to listen to Seattle Here and Now on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
1,
2, get down. What's up, big and little homies? This is Masvita Maraire, host of Seattle Sports Weekly on Rainier Avenue Radio World, your one-stop shop for Seattle sports. We cover preps, we cover college, we cover pro, we cover it all. Huskies, Mariners, Seahawks, Garfield, South, Roosevelt, Petro, King County. This is where you want to listen to for all the sports that's happening in Seattle. Seattle Sports Weekly on Rainier Avenue Radio World. See a bad.
Did you know that there's an updated COVID-19 booster that protects you even more than the original vaccines? Even if you got the first vaccinations, now it's time to get this new updated booster shot. It's especially important for adults 50 and over and people with a compromised immune system. Even though you may not hear about people catching COVID as often, each week in King County, some people even end up in the hospital because of it. So check with your loved ones and make sure they've gotten an updated booster. For more information on where to get a COVID vaccine, including free vaccination resources, visit kingcounty.gov/vaccines. kingcounty.gov/vaccines.
This is Rainier Avenue Radio .world.
So it was the people stopped it, and there was justice in terms of the stopping of those freeways, restoration, but it continued in all these other layers. So yeah, it was initially it's the symbol.
And when you were making this film, and you were, I'm going to use the word exposed, since you're not from Seattle, to some of the historical aspects of Seattle, the repression that took place, the oppression that took place, and the racism that took place. Was that something that you had seen in other cities? Was it something that was unique to Seattle?
I'd seen it in every city. I'd seen it in the city I grew up in, Tucson, and I saw it in Los Angeles and San Diego. It's inherent because America is built on racism. So the structures are all like underneath the city and there and all around the city.
How were you impacted as you began to find out more and do more research and see how people were personally impacted with the decisions that were made in this environmental injustice, transportation injustice, housing insecurity, all of the things that were caused? How were you personally impacted as you began to talk to people and see how this, again, not just on a large scale, which it was, but also individually?
Individually, I mean, I was moved in many of these interviews, incredibly found myself, with like Elmo Dixon's and Larry Gossett's interviews. They just floored me, and led me to do more and more research and more rage and tears that were just like, all I could do is just like make this based on the what they shared with me. And the film, I know I have one perspective as I want to make it so that it's available for anyone, including all the interviews, and other people can take those interviews and share that story, because I know this is just one story. There are multiple stories. It's only an hour long. But yeah, it's Vivian Phelps is another one whose story was incredibly moving. Everyone.
Again, we just finished watching Ramps to Nowhere. My guest is Linda, the producer, director, editor. Obviously, a passion project for you. Are you a documentary filmmaker? Is that where you kind of cut your teeth, or tell me about your background and your interest in filmmaking?
Oh, thank you. No, I don't think of myself as a documentary filmmaker. I think of myself as, personal filmmaker. I make personal films. I started out making films about my family and about, I grew up in poverty, moved all over, white poverty, and I made films about that and my life, and then I broadened and made about communities and outside, but a lot of those structures, come back to kind of how I was, what I experienced. So personal films have ranged in narrative, experimental, and documentary, but primarily I think of myself as a personal filmmaker.
What is it about creating, making, researching films that you enjoy?
It's the experience of being able to talk about things that are really abstract and really important and really big. And you can take in so many layers of that. Bringing in something like this it's also just the connection with community and history and moving people. It's magical in some ways. It's also part of kind of restoration, because so much of this history is lost, and feeling like I can do something when it's, climate change is upon us. The awful harms of racism still exist. Like, what can I do as a part in terms of restoring that and being a part? And part of that is through making, and that drives me as a maker is how can I do something? Whether it's successful or not, I don't know. I try.
All right, I am going to give you out here in the audience a couple seconds to think about some questions that you'd like to ask, and I anticipate that you will have some. I'm going to give you a chance to run that through a little bit. One of the things that I want to share with you about the importance of the work that you're doing, it's similarly aligned to what we do here at Rainier Avenue Radio and the Columbia City Theater, and that is capturing and authenticating history, and then digitizing that history, and then making that history available to folks. And how critically important that is, that if you don't write the story, someone else will write the story. And you mentioned that this is from your perspective, but you did do your due diligence in doing research and talking to folks and trying to, again, apparently to get as many perspectives as you could with this project. And so shout out to the Seattle Griot Project, which is something that we do here as well, where we go out and we interview folks. And I see some folks that were in this film that are no longer with us anymore. So you captured that information, which we can also do that through old newspapers and articles, but then a lot of cultures have oral traditions as well, and so it's great to have those. So I'm gonna find, is there anybody out there now? Yes, you have a question.
Yeah, Minda, just real quickly, I wanted to know, the film was great, by the way, it's my first time seeing it. You mentioned you wanted to make the materials that went into making this film, as well as the film itself, free to all. Is there a way that people can access all of that? Like, what's the best way for them to do that?
Okay. Let's repeat that question. Great question. Can you, before you answer it, do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, how can people get access to this material? I did make it never with the goal of I'm going to sell this and make money, but always as a goal of reaching to as many people as possible, to making it as free and accessible to everyone. And that includes even the raw interviews, everything. So all of that's being given to the UW Special Collections. We're archiving it, translating it for captions, all to be available for free, that anyone wants those interviews, they can take it, use it however they want to tell their own stories. And Ramps to Nowhere is also for free, and it'll, it's always been public. Anybody can watch it, use it however they want. If it moves them, great. Share it widely. I've had people reach out all over the U.S. have been reaching out and telling me that they're using the film, for advocating, stopping new highway construction in neighborhoods. And it's, to me, that was the success of the film. That's how it comes back when you ask that question. You make this, and this film was like, it became something that bigger than I thought it was going to be, actually, to find front and centered, to be connected to you, to have these people reach out that are just, it was an opera singer on a bus said, like, I saw your film and I'm going to use it. And I've seen it and used it in public hearings. So it's so moving. And because it just comes back to what I think, it speaks to the people who rose up and spent so much of their time at those public hearings in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I'm just really very, very excited that that's the best thing that I've ever hoped for this film.
The footage is available, the audio is available, the cost is free. 99 free. So you can get this information. You can watch this film. I'm going to take one more question from the audience. So I've got a question from somebody out here, and as we're getting that individual lined up, because I know somebody has a question out there about this amazing film. I'm going to do what we call here. See, if the cameraman can zoom in on this, this is Call to Conscience. And this is a theme for us in the things that we do. We did a Black History Month museum the entire month here. This environmental justice, climate justice campaign is part of our Call to Conscience to raise awareness among individuals about personal responsibility. That, you have a voice in your head that says to you, I'm doing right or I'm doing wrong. And you do whatever you do. And I'm not faulting anybody or saying anybody has to live up to a particular moral interpretation that belongs to someone else. But this is a call to conscience. And I think that your film was a call to conscience. We have another question? Yes.
Did you get any money for produce that? And if was it through grants or donations? And how much did you actually end up utilizing to create what you have right there?
The question was essentially, did you get any grants, to produce this film? And that's ultimately, I think, what it comes down to. He might have been asking too, how much did you spend to put this together? I don't know. That may be your own business, but I'm asking because it was asked, and people who may be thinking about doing this type of work or wondering what this type of work may entail. That's a good thing. Okay, what should I budget for? And again, you did a lot of these things yourself. So hiring an entire crew would have been, increased those costs exponentially, but you did a lot of it yourself. But
yeah, I did it myself. I wore the camera, the microphone, I did the editing, 100 labor of love. But there was some grant money that paid for memory cards and paid for some drives. And that was through the University of Washington, and also through one of the King County grants, gave a small grant that helped to pay for, again, those memory cards and hard drives and storage costs. But, 7 years, it was like tons, thousands of hours of my time given to this. But it was the story and the people that was so moving. All the time they put in for free at those hearings, organizing, going, knocking on doors and saying, we got to stop this. It was like, they didn't have money for that. And so it was worth it. Every moment, every hour, and I'm grateful for the grants. Had I not had the grants, it might have taken longer and more of my own money. I did spend a lot of my own money on it, so.
Well, I can tell you that I am personally proud to have your film here on the stage at the historic Columbia City Theater, where many, many barriers have been broken in this building. So it was good to see your film as part of this presentation that we're doing for Earth Deserves More Than a Day. And I want to give you an opportunity for final words here, anything that you'd like to say on whatever level to those who are watching and listening us right now. Remember, some folks are just listening, and some folks are going to watch this on demand a little bit later as well. So your words are going to live forever. All right, not put any pressure on you.
I just want to say thank you. It's an honor to be here, as I said at the beginning. Such a pleasure to meet you and to be connected. And I hope that you, whoever's watching this, you go out and make your films. And I love Earth, and I love the people. And there's a lot of restoration, and there's a lot of reparation that we need to do. And I'm here in solidarity for anyone and everyone who's willing to do that. You have me to work with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, it's me, Tony B. We are live on Rainier Avenue Radio in the historic Columbia City Theater. If you have questions about this, just email us at rainieravenueradio.world@gmail.com. I know that was a lot, but if you break it down, it's rainieravenueradio.world, same deal where you're watching, at gmail.com. And we'll try and get those answers to you. If you have questions about what it took to make this film, you may be interested in acquiring some of the audio, some of the video. And I'm going to say this one more again, just to make sure I'm not making a mistake. The cost is $free.
Free, yes. Free.
And if you don't know about gathering information and archiving, free is not the way this thing works. But that's how it should be when we're talking about history and talking about lives and how lives have been impacted. This information should be accessible. It should be free. And then, another good thing about it is it pays tribute and it honors those who have done things to make our lives a little bit better so that we don't have what could have been in place in this city at one time, which gets us into a whole nother conversation about being engaged and being involved. And so many things going on in the world right now. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't pay attention to things going on in the world, but what you should pay attention to is your local politics and things that are happening in your community and your neighborhood. And you can do both of those things parallel. So I know you get a lot of news coming at you from a lot of different places now, and then there's a lot of things going on, but this is Earth Week, right? It's not Earth Day. Deserves more than a day. There's also a slogan, EJ every day. All right, but we're giving you a week worth of information, and it has just been amazing. You can go back and see some of the conversations that have taken place that started on Monday morning when we began this incredible week, and here we are on Thursday. A lot more to come. Thank you, Linda, for joining us. Thank you for that film, and I know that we'll be accessing a lot of that critical information that you put together in your film. Thank you.
Great. Can't wait. Thank you.
All right, we got more programming coming up. We're gonna take you back to your regular programming now. We've got stuff happening at 2, stuff happening at 3, another film happening at 5. Earth deserves more than a day. Thank you.